All right, so this week we're doing the astrology of the fifth house, and of course the house of children and desires, fertility, and here we have a woman in childbirth. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. All right. So in Jyotish, the first, the fifth, and the ninth house are called trichonas. Actually, the first house is considered an angle and a trine. The trichonas are basically trigons or trines, and they have a kind of special benefic quality. The fifth and the ninth house especially have a special benefic quality. The first house, of course, has a benefic quality because it's the house of life and it's the strongest angle. And so it's got this, in Jyotish, it's got this double-pronged sense of being this really auspicious house because it's an angle and it's also a trine because it's in trine to the ninth and the fifth house. But the fifth and the ninth houses both have quite a bit to do with fortune, good fortune, blessings, dharma, things of that nature. This is specifically in Jyotish. The ninth house is definitely specifically connected to the father in Jyotish, which it is not necessarily in this particular tradition of astrology. Although in the Hellenistic tradition, there is a more of a tradition of using the ninth house as the father. Anyway, so let's look at what, starting with Manilius, which would be around the 1st century, there would be an understanding of this. So look at how it's a region of uncertainty to Manilius. But once we get to Valens, and we're going to look at Valens and see what he has to say about it, but once we get to Valens, it starts to be this house of good fortune. And I think that there's this, for instance, like the term I just used, tricona, is actually very, very close to the term trigon, which was used in the Hellenistic period. And there is a belief that there is kind of an amalgamation of astrology that happened between ancient Greece, or the Hellenized Greek world, or the Hellenized world, and India, and that then India kind of kept it and did what it usually does, which is turn it into India, and then it moved on into, and then it moved away from India into the Middle East, which is where we start to encounter it. So I think this kind of Hindu slash pagan Hellenistic, which we don't really have that much of a background in, especially the pagan Hellenistic, specifically the pagan Hellenistic. There we go. I think when we get to this idea of the difference between the pagan Hellenistic, or the amalgamation, like I said, between the pagan Hellenistic, hey there, Haneen, welcome, and between the Jyotish, the Hindu Jyotish, then we start to kind of see, this idea of good fortune. In Jyotish, the fifth house is called Purva Punya, or what kind of punya you receive from your past life. Punya is kind of debt or blessing, kind of, so a debt or a blessing that would be received from a past life. Your punya is basically kind of merit. That's the term. It's merit that you will have earned in a past life, and that when you look at the fifth house from a Jyotish standpoint, then you see that. So once again, we're starting to get into we're looking at these origins of where the fifth house, as this house of good fortune, comes from. So the other thing as well is children. In almost all of these cultures, like India, Greece, Mediterranean cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, East Asian cultures, children are an extension of good fortune. You're lucky if you have children. You're unlucky if you're not able to have children. So that is kind of a marker. Oh, do you have any children? Oh, children make you lucky. I remember being in Vietnam and a Vietnamese man saying that, children make you lucky. And so there's this, once again, this connection with children and good fortune, and children and with being fruitful and multiplying. And so an extension or an expression of good fortune is to be fruitful and to multiply, and children are the most overt or most the most obvious expression of that. And often, people will say, actually, one of the things they'll tell you when you go to a job program is they'll say, when a person asks you, what is your greatest achievement in an interview, do not say your children. So people are even possibly motivated to saying that their children are their greatest achievement. So once again, here's this idea of fortune, of children and fortune, this bundle of joy, right? So just something kind of about why the fifth house is initially called good fortune, why it's called, where this kind of idea of it being called good fortune is from. Also understanding that Venus is if Venus is in her joy, or it is the joy of Venus. And so Deborah Holding talks about in her book, we have a few more excerpts that we'll use from the book, where she talks about how this is one of the first houses where the significations of the house really reflect the planet that has their joy, who rejoices there, or the planet that is identified with the house. And we're going to see that as well. It's called the house of children and desire, the house of children and sensual enjoyment, sensual pleasure. Right. So all of those things fall under Venus, but it's also receives places like, look, we're just going to go through it. So children, good fortune, friendship, accomplishments. And of course, the 11th house is officially the house of friendship, but accomplishments, that's interesting. We think of now the 10th house as being connected with our accomplishments. But I was just in a Jyotish room this morning, and we were talking about your highest accomplishments and your greatest awards come from the 11th. Right. So the 10th and the 11th will have a lot to do nowadays, or certainly from this time period, actually from the Islamic medieval time period, will have the most to do with that. The number of children and their sex, they're called of the house of good fortune because it is the house of Venus. Okay, so we're right. And so Formicus is no later than 7th century. And so we're talking, he's already saying it's the house of Venus, it's the good fortune because it's hers. And when we look at the joys, if everybody here should have a little bit of an idea of the 7 joys of each planet, right? Each planet has its own joy. Each house, there are 7 houses in which a planet rejoices. And you'll notice that the 5th and the 11th, the 2 benefics are the planets who rejoice there. So Venus rejoices in the 5th, Jupiter rejoices in the 11th. And also notice that the 5th house is the nocturnal part of the chart, and Venus is a nocturnal planet, and the 11th house is the diurnal part of the chart, and Jupiter is a diurnal planet. And then also the 6th and the 12th house have Mars and Saturn as the planets who rejoice in them. So Mars is the nocturnal planet who rejoices in the 6th, which is the nocturnal part of the chart, and Saturn is the diurnal planet that rejoices in the 12th, which is in the diurnal part of the chart. Right, so we have good fortune and good spirit, that's what 5 and 11 are called, and then bad fortune and bad spirit, that's what 6 and 12 are called. So just to see, try to get an idea of some of these things, that you see the kind of similarity between those 2 houses and how they might. And actually, it's interesting because I think, Haneen, you were the one that asked on Thursday a question about how sect may influence, the extent of the influence. And so here we're seeing sect built in to the definition of joy, right? So it's a subtle aspect that is somewhat defining, but isn't necessarily maybe distinguishing. So defining without being distinguishing. And I think that that's, once again, that was kind of what I was saying with it on Thursday, that when we get into ideas of sect, and we'll look at that, we'll kind of look at things from an idea of sect a little bit today, because it's always interesting to kind of bring some of these things in that we haven't looked at and see whether or not we think they actually are making a difference. Okay, so let's see, what do you have to say there? Literally love the symmetry underlying the part of the rationale for the planetary joy scheme. Yeah, so you see how I mean? It's built into the way that they were looking at it, period. Right, so we know that it's of importance, is it of distinguishable importance? Can it make something happen or not? And it looks like probably not. But it looks like actually one of the things that, well, you know what? We'll wait till we get to charts and then remind me to bring sect up and a way of kind of looking at that again. All right, so then she comes to Al-Biruni, who's like 8th century, children 8th, 9th, but we're firmly in the Islamic period now. Children, friends, clothes, pleasure, joy, and now we start to really get into the nuts and bolts of what we start to understand the 5th house to be. Wealth of the father, because it's the second from the 4th. And now we come to the 17th century with Lily, children, pregnant women. Yes, fundamental, though not definitive, or not determinable. Not necessarily determined. It may not determine the way something perfects. It may give a certain amount of cachet to the planet. But once again, let's wait. Let's bookmark this and wait till we get to the charts, and then we'll take that into account and see what we think. So children, pregnant women, banquets. Aha. So now we get into, okay, so once again, remember what Firmicus has set up here. It's the good fortune because it is the house of Venus, who's the lesser benefic. And all of these things after are her. Children, even she is one of the planets that represents children and fertility. Friends, clothes. We just found when we looked at the 11th house that she's the planetary significator for the 11th because she represents the amicability between friends. Clothes, pleasure, right? She's adornments and clothing, pleasure and fine fabrics. Pleasure, obviously Venus is pleasure and beauty. Joy, she's happiness and mirth. Remember, she's comic, she's mirth and laughter and enjoyment and pleasure. So all of those things belong in the 5th house. When we come to Lily, then we even get into the places, banquets, taverns, whorehouses, plays, gaming, ambassadors. So music halls, theaters, bars, nightclubs, that's your 5th house. Hey, look, Mary's coming, yay. So, and now modern creativity. It's interesting. So even Jyotish uses the 5th house for creativity. And because it does use the zodiac alphabet, what I call the zodiac alphabet. We're not so down with it in our particular tradition, but we see this idea of creativity. I think we can use it for creativity. Now, the problem with it, now I want to talk about this for a second. The problem with the zodiac alphabet and the 5th house, if you've seen my video on the zodiac, looking at the zodiac, or a new look at the zodiac, which is part of the traditional astrology course, then you know that I talked about the zodiac alphabet, and also there's another video called What Not to Do or How Not to Interpret, and it was all about using the zodiac alphabet. And one of the biggest examples is the 5th house and Leo, because the 5th house is the house of children and fertility. And Leo is a sterile sign. So this whole idea of fruitfulness, multiplication, the signs that are fruitful, they're actually called fruitful, or they're actually called fertile, are the water signs. Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, those are the fertile, fruitful signs that multiply. The sterile signs are the Mercury signs in Leo, Gemini, Virgo, and Leo. So when we come to the 5th house and we're looking at Leo, and it's mostly because we think of the sun as representing the self, so then we think of self-expression and all of that. But I'll stick with it with creativity because Venus is artistic talent, and Venus is music, and Venus is art, and Venus is performance, and Venus is dance, and Mercury, Venus especially, when we see those together. So I definitely say that yes, I do like 5th house for creativity, but not because Leo equals the 5th house, because Venus is about artistic creativity, and she's there, and about what gives us joy, and about what we love to do and our passion. For real, even in planting by the moon, it's similar connotations with fire. Wait, I didn't understand that part. Hey, you go on mic and say what you mean by this. For even real implanting by the moon, it's similar connotations with
Oh,
fire.
it's the Leo being a barren sign. I was like, yes, even planting by the moon. They say is a barren sign if you're looking at when to maintain your garden, planting in
That's
fire
right.
sign and in air
Right.
sign. Plus
That's
Virgo
right.
is not
And
meant to
think
be
of
great.
excellent, honey. And think about it like this. When here's Asia, great. Think of the terrain that Leo rules. Leo rules either the deep, deep forest or the desert. It's hot and dry. What's the nature of the womb? The nature of the womb is warm and wet, right? So Leo is a hot, dry sign. The sun is a hot, dry planet, right? We don't want hot and dry in the womb. Same thing with Virgo, which is a cold and dry sign. It's also the sign of the Virgin, mind you, which of course is, some literal metaphor here, but it's also cold and dry. So when we're thinking about what are the conditions that are the most beneficial to the womb, which means beneficial to carrying a child to term, then a hot and dry sign like Leo is not going to be that. And so we have yet another example. Scorpio's ruler of the fifth house in the Thema Mundi. Yes, okay, right, which is still a fertile sign. And so even though it's the moon's detriment. So this is how sometimes when we can still see planets that work in and out, and ruler of the reproductive, not more than genitals, reproductive organs, although genitals comes from genitor or to generate, right? So the reproductive organs are generative. Fantastic. Scorpio and genitals. That's right. And the reproductive organs. So so we're still on the very first, we're still looking at the very first one. Now we move to balance. So here's first century or second century. No problem, no problem. So let's see, if benefics behold the ascendant or the lot of fortune. So remember that we in this area, we use the lot of fortune as an ascendant. And so did Valens. And so that's what he's basically saying. He's saying if benefics are ruler of the ascendant or the lot of fortune, and they're in this house, the native will be great, will lead the masses, and will make laws for them. Venus will be especially gracious if it rules the ascendant or the lot, right? Because then she will not only be in the house of her joy, but she will have a special strength because she'll rule those two special places of life. And especially if Venus is in its proper face or in its own place. And I'm sure by that, they had different ideas for what they meant by face, but place they're talking about, obviously essential dignity, and it makes men wealthy and honored. So once again, we're dealing with this idea of good fortune. And these titles mostly come from the Hellenistic period. Good fortune is definitely a title that Valens was using for it. If the same is true for all the stars, if they govern the ascendant or the lot, they produce the good that is appropriate to their nature and to good fortune. All right. Now we move into the Hellenistic period. Now I move away from the Hellenistic period and into the Islamic medieval period. And so on the left is Al-Khabizi. To the left is actually, well, both of them, Al-Biruni and Al-Khabizi. The fifth over his desires and children. So remember that the planet that rules desire, there are two of them, but the actual planet that's given to desire is Venus, right? So the two planets that are called appetitive, that rule over appetite, are the moon and Venus. But Venus really is the planet of desire. So I'll remember the moon is always the co-ruler in everything, right? So we always look to her in every matter, for every situation. And then when we come to Al-Khabizi, then he's saying the fifth house of children and delights, right? What we enjoy, our sensual pleasures. So from desire, genital Jew, and eating and drinking. Okay, so here we come to another thing, legates and donations, right? So it's a house of legates, which a legate is essentially like a diplomat or a messenger from one. So a legation, which is a representative from one kingdom to another. And so think maybe if we think of it as the second from the fifth, then we think of it as or the second from the fourth rather, the fourth house would be the country or the castle itself, and the legation would be the representation. It would be, we think of the second house as being all of the people that make up the host of a king, right? So the 11th house is the host of a king and all of his ministers, his army, all of that stuff would be the second from the 10th, right? So in this particular case, we could be seeing the legation as being the second from the fourth. The country is the fourth, and the country or the castle is the fourth, and the second from the fourth in this respect. Donations and gifts, the fifth house represents, and obviously Venus is representing gifts. Also delegate diplomacy, that's right. So diplomacy, right? So the art of diplomacy. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I talk about a lot is about Saturn's exaltation in Libra and manners and etiquette. How Saturn, as the exaltation ruler of Libra, that it's not really Venus, that it's Saturn giving us the rules of engagement. And we've talked a lot about this with Aquarius, about how Saturn as the ruler of Aquarius, or how Aquarius is how we organize society, right? How we all decide, it's the fixed air, how we all decide that we're going to organize things between us and get along between us. So it's our civic behavior. And so Saturn in Libra is more specific, right? Libra is interpersonal, it's you and I. So then Saturn in Libra is when it's all about Emily Post and where the fork goes and where the salad spoon goes and what you say when, and diplomacy is all about that too. So this is how, when we remember on Thursday we talked about mutant versus domicile ruler. And so this is how Saturn takes over in Libra from Venus, right? Because Saturn is the exaltation ruler, and by day he's also the triplicity ruler of Libra, right? So he can end up setting the agenda for Libra, which means it's all about rules of how we do things, right? We were just talking about that this morning. I was trying to make that point this morning in my Jyotish group, and so it was interesting. All right, and so then Andaragar gives us those three triplicity rulers to look at. So children are the first lord of the first triplicity lord. Sensual delights are the second, and then legates. So then the messenger is in the third. What does he say? The diplomat or the legate is in the fifth. Is in the fifth, but it's the third triplicity ruler of the fifth. And on the right here we have more of what she was saying, what Deborah Holding was saying. The principal rulership of the fifth house is in signifying pregnancy and children, as befits Venus, the goddess of fertility, of whom the classical historian Pliny wrote, its influence is the cause of the birth of all things upon earth. At both its rising, it scatters a genital dew, that's what you were laughing about, which it not only fills the conceptive organs of the earth, but also stimulates those of all animals. And she's also the mating season, right? So we come now to Benatti in the fifth house. So Benatti's idea, so remember once again, Benatti is the compiler of all the information. Alcabisi said fifth house signifies children, delights, right? He just talked about who we just looked at. Legates, donations, what is said about a man after his death, right? So the fourth house is the place of the grave. So the second house, the second from the fourth, then becomes what's the legacy of the person, right? It's the substance of whatever. And so it's the substance of whatever their legacy is. Now, I had also read somewhere that it was the fourth house that was what the person, that the fourth house was what the person was was said about the person after death. But I'm seeing these, but that was in the Hellenistic period that I remember reading some of that stuff. But here it's the fifth. So that's something interesting to look at. And then he said, in addition, that it signifies joy and clothing. Right? And Vedius Valens said it signifies papers, books, heralds, and novelties. A herald is obviously somebody bringing a message, and novelties, obviously Venus loves her novelties. And Abil al-Khayyat said it signifies everything in which trust is had, honor, seeking, a woman, friendship, and the conditions of the citizens and the fruits of inheritance. This is interesting. Everything in which trust is had, everything in which one would place their trust, and in which one can place their trust, right? So the 6 and the 12 would be where you would not want to place your trust. But so for instance, think about it like this. The 5th house is games of chance. So it's the 5th house we look at when somebody says, is it a good time to play the stock market, right? Because the 5th house is games, and games of chance specifically, and casinos and gambling. So then we would look to the 5th house to see whether we can put our trust in the market, right? If the ruler of the 5th were in good condition. So here's a place we're looking specifically at the 5th house to represent good fortune, and also as a place to be looking for, oh, I think I've got a chart of somebody that won the lottery. And so I'll see if I can find that one. I have somebody came up on Reddit who had won the lottery. But when I looked at it, I was loath to believe them, to be honest with you. But anyway, but that's interesting. But so I like this idea of something in which you can place your trust, because indeed, when people are asking from the astrology, is it a good time to invest, and what should I be investing in, right? Because we could be telling them from that what they could invest in as well, right? Then that's something there. Can I put my trust in this? Can I put my trust in this to make my fortune increase, right? Which is what we're looking at the 5th house to be able to do, the invisible forces that do that or don't. Hilarious fake lottery one. I mean, let's look at, if I can find it, let's look at the chart and see. Because when I looked at it, I was like, I don't know. But I mean, but you know what? I've seen so many charts where it didn't look like it should have happened. I have another chart of a woman, she had just had twins. She just had twins and she already had a kid or something like that. And the chart had sterile shit written all over it. And I was just like, I'll see if I can find that. Oh my God, I'll see if I can find that one, because that would be perfect for this. We'll see if we missed anything. It's a 5th house chart. I remember being like, why the fuck does this woman have? I mean, she had stuff in Gemini, so okay, you had twins, fabulous. But I remember being like, okay, so 5th house. This both comes from Deborah Holding, and this kind of is what I just kind of said, which is now we've got a house which is basically reflecting the significations of the actual planet. And then she goes to list 11th century astrologer Biruni called it the house of joy, clothes, pleasure, and friends, all of which fall naturally under rulership of Venus. Okay, so Biruni is later, 11th century. 12th century, Ibn Ezra describes, I thought Ibn Ezra was more 11th century, describes association with pleasure, food, drinks, gifts, and diplomats. 16th century, Dario says 5th house for love, ambassadors, and gifts. This might be where this idea of romances for the 5th house comes. Lily says house of pleasure, associated with taverns, plays, recreation, and sport, all of which have ascribed to the, well, not necessarily sport, but certainly taverns, plays, and recreation, and certainly mirth and enjoyment and laughter. Definitely that. So just thought I would put that in there. And now we come to Scherner. This is Scherner who says, 5th house, good fortune, in which the condition is found of sons and of favors. Of course, you're especially fortunate if you have a male child, and of gifts and garments. It rules the stomach, liver, heart, nerves, sides, and back. Isn't that interesting that it does not rule the heart? Oh, he does say heart. And Venus is the co-significator, and that does make sense. But it's interesting that it's not the stomach. You would think the stomach would be in the 4th, which of course would be Cancer, would be connected to the 4th, or Cancer, and what isn't, and the intestines and the belly are in the 6th. So Scherner had a few things where he kind of deviated from some of the things that we've looked at, but I like to use him because he's in between Bonatti and Lilly. And then next is Lily, children, ambassadors in the state of a woman with child, of banquets, of alehouses, taverns, plays, messengers, or agents for republics. The 4th house would be the republic. Of the wealth of the father, the ammunition of a town besieged. Now, of course, the government would possibly be the 10th rather, but the actual republic, the place itself would be the 4th. Ammunition of a town, right? The ammunition of a town besieged, right? So That's what belongs to the town, the second from the fourth. If the woman with child shall bring forth male or female, right? So how to find out whether or not the child will be male or female, of the health or sickness of his son or daughter, that asks the question. It rules the stomach, liver, heart, sides, and back, and is masculine. Of colors black and white or honey colored. Now, I think it's the honey colored for 5 and 9. If I'm, what was it? It was 2 and 12 were green, 3 and 10, 3 and 11 were yellow, I think they were. Then 4 and 10 were red. 5 and 9 were honey colored. So I think probably black and white, or 5 and 9 are honey colored. And then 6 and 12 were 6 and 8 were black. 1 and 7 were white, if I'm not mistaken. Those were the colors for the houses based on the medieval scheme. So he's got the honey colored in there. And then consignificators are Leo. By the 17th century, we're starting to use this zodiac alphabet, and Venus. But once again, we're not looking for Leo if we're looking for fertility. Who doth joy in this house in regard? It's the house of pleasure, delight and merriment. It's wholly unfortunate by Mars or Saturn, and they therein show disobedient children and untoward. So one of the things that we talked about recently was in using the 5th house as a remedy for depression, right? That because it's supposed to be where the enjoyment is, because it's supposed to be what it is we love, what it is we enjoy, where to find our happiness, now, of course, remember the 1st house is where the 1st house, the ruler of the ascendant, and where the ruler of the ascendant is actually where the personal happiness is generally found, and what is called not the local determination, but but I will say personal happiness. Excuse me, but there was another term that Robert Zoller used to use. It was it'll come to me in a second, but it's personal happiness, primary motivation. That's the term that he used, that wherever you found the ascendant and its ruler, the ruler of the ascendant, whatever house and sign, that gives you an idea of the personal happiness and primary motivation for the person. That's where they want to be. That's what gives them kind of a reason for being. But the 5th house represents what gives them joy, what brings joy, what gives them joy, or where they can find joy. And where they can find creativity. And often you see people that'll say, I don't feel very creative. I have Leo in my 5th house, but I don't feel very creative. And Leo's in Aquarius and it's square Saturn, or Sun's in Aquarius and square Saturn, or whatever. You know what I mean? So you've got to look at these things to see what the profile. It's the same thing so it looks like from this, like we're looking at this from an idea of children, but there's 2 important ways that I feel like we should be examining the 5th house from. Obviously, one is children, the ability for the chart to produce children. So is it fertile in that respect? And then the other is in the kind of the quantum ability or the quantum amount of fortune, of good fortune in the chart. Now, there's other ways in which we can see this. We look at the part of fortune quite a bit to look at that and the ruler of it. But it'd be interesting to see if the 5th house is an important factor with it. And we might look at some charts of people who are very, very fortunate, who could be considered very fortunate. Vaguely remember a theory from Chris's book that talks about Venus having joy in Leo using an alternate scheme. Interesting. If you run across it in more specifics, let me know what that's about. Okay, so going on. So coming to this is what Scherner, on the second is what Scherner would say we should look at when we're looking at children, the native's ability to have children. The 5th house and its lord, the 10th house and the 11th house, right? Because the 10th and the 11th are what can really happen. And the planets in them can really happen. Venus is the co-significatrix of the 5th, the almutin of the significators for children, which is on the right, the part of children, its lord, the part of spirit, which is the part of future things or things to come, the part of stability, that's durabilitas, and that's a 1st house. That's a 1st house part. And I think that's very interesting. This is the first time I've ever seen this, but I think that's really interesting because as a first house part, that shows how durable and stable the physicality of the person is. And so that it makes sense that that would be something you would look at. This is why I like to use Scherner, because he really, all of these people that I'm using were practicing astrologers. Right. So that's why I don't really use Ptolemy very much, because Ptolemy was a scholar who was another compiler, and there's no real evidence that Ptolemy actually was a practicing astrologer, whereas Vettius Valens, who's his contemporary, absolutely was. And there are actually charts that he uses and chart examples and delineation examples that he uses, and all of these guys that I tend to choose from are practicing astrologers. So Scherner was practicing, and he decided that this is what he liked, right? And then, of course, he used the first triplicity ruler of the fifth house, which represents children. Now, this is interesting. He used the third triplicity lord of the 11th, which represents how well you do from friends. I wonder if there's a different idea of what that is, or if there's a different interpretation of it. And then the third triplicity of the 7th, which was partnerships. So I think it's very interesting when we know these things, when we kind of have an understanding of what all these things are, then we can kind of dissect Scherner's what shall we say, his reasoning behind, his raison d'etre, his reasoning behind. So the cusp of the fifth for the mutant, so these would be the places that these would be all of the different points that we would find the different scoring system, right? So and then we would find the planet that's the winner, that has the highest score in all of these places. So the fifth house and its lord, Venus and her lord, the part of children and its lord, the first triplicity lord of the fifth house, right? So that would be the places that we would look for the mutant. Notice that
Funny,
he did
Garth.
not. Sure. Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, I know someone who does this. I'm not friends with her, but like a friend of a friend, you'd say, who does what he does, Schoner did, but currently she's a like a fertility astrologer, and she uses a compound mutant that's actually really similar. It's like AC, ruler of AC, fifth, ruler of the fifth, moon, ruler of the moon, and Jupiter. So not quite the same, but similar.
Yeah. So I was just going to make the point that often Jupiter, because Jupiter represents for anything that you want to increase, it's Jupiter, right? So he's really fertility and increase. But Venus is specific to children, right? Because there's no other way to make them except through her, right? You got to have sex to have children. And Venus is coitus. So the coitus has to happen. The seed must be spilled in the womb, right? And Venus is the seed and the womb, right? So there has to be that event that happens as a result of coitus. And so we see here that Scherner doesn't think Jupiter is the most important. Look at what he said to consider. He didn't even consider Jupiter. He considered the part of stability over Jupiter, the part of spirit over Jupiter. Fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really interesting. And she would take them all and get the average and pull the mutant from there, and then look at the first, second, and third trip rulers of that one compound mutant, and they would show the various stages of pregnancy, like the first third of your fertile years.
I love it. So your first trimester would be the first. I love it. What's tell me, figure out what her name is. I'd love to check out what she's doing.
Nicola something. Yeah,
especially if it's working. If it's working, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
that's what we'd love to see it. We love to see that.
I think she uses it for trimesters, but she also just said if you divide like a woman's fertile years from when she gets her period to when she stops, and divide that in thirds, it describes like your whole life. Like she's known women who like whatever, say the ruler of the first triplicity ruler was in bad shape, but like second or third was good, and they get pregnant later in life.
Oh yeah, I love it. That's exactly how we should be looking at things. So she did exactly what I always am saying we should be doing. Find a technique. See if, thank you, Haneen. See if Haneen has put a link of hers, an interview of hers a YouTube link in the chat. But find a technique, figure out what it is. Remember, my favorite question to people is, what is it you're working on? What is it you're looking at? What's your thing with astrology? So her thing is fertility. She's found this cool technique, and she just bam, off she goes and tries to do her thing with it. I love it. Okay. Oh, I didn't have that was the last one. So what I thought I would do next is I would go to, I would go here. This is the material from Bonatti's, or this is the material from my traditional astrology YouTube channel or YouTube video, which was fertility and compound almutants. And so I thought we would go back over what Bonatti thought was a fertility thing. So, or brought fertility. So, and this is something because this was new to me when I started teaching it. When I learned it and started teaching it, this was actually new to me, and it really brought a depth to to understanding it for me. Because prior to that, what I was doing, I was kind of going where your friend, where the woman you were talking about was. I was looking at the ascendant, the sign on the ascendant, the sign that the moon was in, the sign that the ruler that the fifth was in, and that the ruler of the fifth was in, and that the ruler of all those planets were in, and Jupiter. And I was kind of basing the fertility on this. But note what actually is going on here. What he says that Baruch and Anut say that you ought to look at the 10th in the nativity of a native, and likewise the 11th, the 1st, and the 7th. So he's not saying anything. Remember when we started kind of looking through all of this stuff and learning through the course, we realized that in a lot of ways, these houses are umbrellas. And we don't look primarily to the Lord of the house for the thing that we're looking for. We saw that with the 2nd house. We saw that with the 10th house. And now we're seeing it again with the 5th house. Anutz and Baruch said in the chapter on children that on the matter of children, you ought to look at the 10th, the 11th, the 1st, and the 7th. And you want to see if the planets that signify children, that say yes to children, are there. Those planets are Jupiter, natural significator of fertility and increase, Venus, who's the lady of the goddess of fertility, Mercury, the natural significator for children, Moon, the co-ruler of everything, and mothers, the Lord of the fifth, the part of fortune, the part of children, or their lords. So either the part of fortune or the Lord of the part of fortune or the Lord of the part of children. So just take that in for a second. So what Bonatti is saying is that these two astrologers said that when you're really looking to see if somebody can have children or not, you're looking at the 10th, 11th, 1st, and 7th, and you're noting what planets are there. Are there planets that say yes to children? Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, Moon, Lord of the fifth, ruler of the part of fortune, part of children and their lords. Right, part of children or the lords of either of those two parts, are they there? Or are the Sun, Mars, and Saturn there? Right, because Sun and Mars are hot and dry. Saturn is cold and dry. Remember, we were just talking about that, right? And all three of those planets can become malefic. 4, if one of the aforesaid significators of children were in the aforesaid places, or in one of them, or even in the 5th, okay, and they were made fortunate and strong, and one of the benefics were to aspect them by trine or sextile. So let's break it down. If there is any of the planets that signify children in the 10th, 11th, 7th, or 1st houses, or the 5th, and they were fortunate and strong, and a malefic is aspected. They will signify the native is indubitably going to have children. So that's the absolute best it can be. Unless that significator were with one of the fixed stars of the nature of Mars or Saturn in the same minute. If, however, they were weak, they will judge there are going to be few children, right? So this is the basic idea behind whether or not a person is going to have children. So what I thought I would do next is I would get some charts from our astrology study. Here's the chart of Bulbacule. So I'm going to look for that other chart I was talking about the woman who had twins. And I want you all to see if you can talk to me about what this chart. First of all, what planets are in the 1st, 7th, 10th, or 11th of this chart? Anybody? No one?
I'm trying to look a little closer. Is Venus on the cusp enough to be in the first?
Let's see. Hold
I
on a
can't tell if
second.
it's within 5 degrees,
Hold on a
but
second.
maybe Venus. Yeah.
It's within 5. It's within 6, so I'll give it to them. I'll give it to her.
Okay.
I would say Mars.
Venus, Mars. Yep. Pluto, if you counter. And were you looking at the part of fortune as a planet? No.
I would. Well, it's one of the part. It's one of the.
Oh, it's in
things
the
it talks
4th
about.
anyway. Sorry.
It's one, and it's one of the things it talks about.
Okay.
Right. So it's one of the things I would. If we whole sign looked at it, then the part of fortune would be in the 5th, and the ruler
Yeah.
of the part of fortune would be in the 1st.
Yeah.
Which, in my opinion, that would kind of say yes. And also notice that the ruler of the 5th, right? So the ruler of the 5th is essentially close to the 1st, and the ruler of the 5th is applying to its ruler, Mars, or its exaltation ruler. Mars is in Scorpio, which is a fertile sign. So even though, so this is one of those things I'm talking about, kind of where, for instance, we've got this Mars. It's supposedly a planet that says no to children. Yeah. Now we don't know if this person has children or not. Let me check. I have stuff written because I have a class of people that I was using. Oh, planets, and they're in the planets in 11th section. So I have a class of people that I was using who I was using specifically because they don't have any children. But this person is not one of them. So, but what we do have Mercury in the 11th, right? Mercury was one of the planets that we were looking for. We were looking for Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, the moon, the ruler of the 5th, the part of fortune, the part of children, and the ruler of either of those two. So in this particular case, we have the ruler of the 5th in the 1st house. We're going to go ahead and give Venus the 1st. We have the ruler of the part of fortune in the 5th. If we're looking at it from, oh, sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, don't forget that I actually have to click on the chart in order for you to be able to see it. That isn't a problem on the video, unfortunately.
That's so much easier. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, if you're having a problem, please speak up. Please let me know.
Wait, so all we know is she has planets in the 11th. We don't know if she has kids or can have kids or anything.
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, we're just making a speculation.
Got it. No, cool.
We're just making a speculation. And like I said, in some of these, we'll be able to say, oh yeah, that didn't work or whatever. In some of these we'll be able to, because I'll have charts of people that can't have children. But in this case, we're just kind of surveying. If this person came to us and said, can I have children? Based on what we just looked at with Bonatti. Now, first of all, let's find the part of children, which is by day Saturn to Jupiter, and by night Jupiter to Saturn. So Saturn is at 21 Sagittarius, Jupiter is at 20 Aries, so it's forward 120 degrees, back 1. So forward 120 degrees is 10 degrees of Taurus, back one is 9 degrees of Taurus. So Venus is not only the ruler of the fifth house of children, she's the ruler of the part of fortune, and she's the ruler of the part of children, and she's close to the ascendant. That's a very strong yes, in my opinion. Then also she's applying to the exaltation ruler of Capricorn, right? Her next application, she's at 3 Capricorn. Mars is at 4 degrees of Scorpio. Mars is the ruler of the 11th, right? The 11th is I get my wish. So in this particular case, I don't think Mars is saying no to children. I think Mars is saying yes, because Mercury is one of those planets that we're looking for in the 1st, 7th, 10th, or 11th house. So in this particular case, I would say more than likely yes, but probably maybe just one or maximum 2, because remember, there are different qualifications, right? So the fertile signs are signs of many children. Then there are signs of few children: Aries, Taurus, Libra, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius. Those are all signs of few children. Capricorn, Aquarius, Aries, Taurus.
What is Scorpio? More than a
Scorpio
few?
is for, okay, so the sterile signs are Gemini, Leo, and Virgo.
Uh-huh.
The fertile signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. The signs of few children are Aries, Taurus, Libra, Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Aquarius. So the fact that there is, I would say, no more than 2 children for this chart. Part of fortune is essentially belonging to the 5th. It's a sign of few children. Venus, the ruler, is in a sign of few children. She's aspecting the ruler of the exaltation, the ruler of the 11th, who's fertile. So fertility is not a problem, but but I don't think that this will produce more than 2 children. And I think girls. Anybody have anything else to say about that? If we're just looking from that.
I was trying to run that other compound on mutant, but it takes me too long. I think
It takes
it takes a second.
What we actually need is a table. Hold on a second.
Yeah, I have my sheets I have like an Excel table open. It takes me a second with the essential dignities.
Yeah, hold on a minute.
But it looks like there's a lot of Mars, well, let's see.
Okay,
I don't want to call it yet.
so there are how many things? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 things. So 7. So we're going to list 7 points. So we want 7 rows.
And then
So 8
7 and 7 columns for the planets, right?
Well, we
How do you
want
do
we want 5 columns. We want 2, 5, 8 columns, 7 rows, 8 rows and 8 columns, because
Okay.
we want the top column. So I'm going to come back to. So what I'm going to have you do is do me a favor and tell me the degree on the cusp of the 5th.
23 Taurus.
23. Okay. And the degree of Venus?
Venus, 3 degrees Capricorn.
So is she in the 3rd degree, or is she 2 something or 3 something?
3 something, sorry.
So she's in the 4th degree. Same thing
Yeah.
with that 23. Is it 23 or 24?
I guess it's 24.
Okay. So 24, then 4 degrees of Capricorn.
Uh-huh.
Okay. The next thing we're looking at is, okay, so Venus is already there. So, oh, her lord, Saturn. What degree is Saturn?
Saturn is 22 Sagittarius.
Okay, and then the next thing, okay, so the part of children was, if I'm not mistaken, it was 9 degrees of Taurus. The part of children was 9 degrees of Taurus.
Okay.
And its ruler is Venus, which of course brings us back to 3 degrees of Capricorn.
You give that another line item. Do you know what I,
I
mean?
would.
If it points you back, you're giving like stacked testimony.
I've done it both ways, where I do and I don't.
Okay.
I've done it
Okay.
both ways where I do and I don't. And so for this particular case, I'm going to.
Okay.
And then the first duplicity ruler is who? Is it daytime?
Yes.
So then it's
Yes,
Venus.
daytime. So yes, Venus. Yeah.
So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and include Venus every time.
It's Venus again. Where did we say she was? 3 Capricorn.
She's at 4
Okay, so
Capricorn.
maybe 4. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm going to use it every time. And hold on a second. What I'm going to do is oops, shit. One second. Matter of fact, I'm gonna hold recording. Okay, so this is us creating a compound on mutant based on the chart that we were just looking at, Bulbakil's chart. We're going to go back to Bulbakil's chart. But if you remember, Bulbakil's chart was a Capricorn rising chart with Venus very close to the ascendant. So Venus is very close to the ascendant. What was the 9 degrees Taurus? Oh, that was 9 degrees Taurus was the part of children. That's right. So the points that we're looking at here are the cusp of the 5th house, the ruler of the 5th house, which is Venus, the ruler of Venus, so the planet who rules the sign Venus is in, the part of children, which we found was at 9 Taurus, the ruler of the part of children, which is Venus, and then the first triplicity ruler of the 5th house, which is Venus. Now, the interesting thing about all this Venus stuff is that when we come to Venus, it points us to Saturn. Now, that's an interesting thing for a compound mutant. So let's first look to see how many points Venus has. Oops. Where the foot? Oh, there we go. Okay, Venus. So Venus has 5, 8, 11, 14, 19, 22, 25, 28. Venus has 28 points. The next, the moon, 4. Keep going, 8. The moon has 8 points. So do you see how we're working it, Haneen?
I'll be honest, I'm still a bit lost, but I'm gonna.
Okay. So once again,
chart.
key into these numbers above. Key into these numbers.
Number 5, I'm seeing as like the ruler of the sign.
Right. That's how. Okay. So the domicile. That's correct. The domicile ruler gets 5 points. The exaltation ruler gets 5 points. Venus
4
gets
points.
the triplicity ruler gets 3 points. The term ruler gets 2 points. Saturn gets 1 point. So if we were just looking at this line, if we were just looking to see which planet gets the most points in 24 degrees of Taurus, in this degree, right? Then Venus would get 5 points. The moon would get 4 points. Venus would get 3 more. So that gives Venus 8 points. Saturn then would get 2 plus 1. So the Venus gets 8 points in 24 degrees of Taurus. The moon gets 4 points in 24 degrees of Taurus, and Saturn gets 3 points in 24 degrees of Taurus. Right, so that's basically, remember, Al-Mutin comes from the term Al-Mubtaz, which means the winner, the victor.
It
The
makes
winner,
it makes a lot more sense now you've counted it like that. Maybe you counted it like
okay,
that first time, but I weren't really following you. But oh my gosh, yes, it's all clicking into place now. I appreciate
good.
you for breaking that down.
Well, and it's important, and maybe we should have, and I probably should have started it. See, of course, we've been working with it for a while, so we're used to kind of slipping, but it's important. I'm so glad that you helped me, that you made me slow it down, because it is really important, because this is what an Al-Mutin means. When somebody says, look for the Al-Mutin of the sign, they're saying, look for the planet that has the most points in that degree. And in this particular degree at daytime. Now, what would happen if it were nighttime? This would change. Because the nocturnal ruler of the triplicity is the moon. So then at nighttime, Venus would have 5 points and the moon would have 7. The moon would then become the Al-Mutin. So here's a place where the domicile ruler is not the winner, which is what I was talking about when I was talking about Saturn and Libra, right? Because Saturn is the exaltation ruler of Libra, who gets 4 points. And by day, he will be the triplicity ruler, which will give him another 3 points. Venus will only have 5 for domicile, which means that Saturn is the winner. Which means that he will call the shots, or he will have just as much influence in calling the shots as Venus. And see, by night, if this were a nighttime chart, the moon would call the shots at 24 degrees of Taurus. At any degree of Taurus, she would call the shots. So that's the point. So all we're doing is we're expanding on this. We're expanding on, just instead of using just 1 degree, we're using 5 different points, or 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different points. And we're figuring out.
It's really cool. Sorry to come in like that. It's so cool how you're breaking it down with the 5 essential dignities and then seeing which planet is going to have the most strength. Because when I conceptualized our mutants in general, I thought it was like trying to look to see which of the triplicity lords had the most strength in general. Like, so this is like, oh, this is mind-blowing, all of this stuff. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a numbers game. Just think of it that way. It's a numbers game. It's all about the numbers. It's all about who wins, who is the victor, who wins. And so now, so first of all, we were looking at, okay, who wins at this place at 24 Taurus? But now we're looking at who wins over these 7 places, these 7 domains. It's a Game of Thrones. Who wins over these 7 thrones? Who's the winner? Who's the one king that will win over the 7 kingdoms? That's how we're looking at it. Now you see that Venus gets 5 points here, but she also gets 3 points, which is 8. And then when we come down to the next domain, Venus gets 3 points there. So we have to add 11. We have to add 3 to give us 11. Now let's move to the next domain. For Capricorn, it's the same one, but we're going to give her another 3. Now we're going to move to 22 Sagittarius. Does she get anything there? No, she doesn't. Then we move back into the sign of Taurus. 9 Taurus, she gets another 5. So we've got 19. Then she gets another 3. There's 22. Now let's move to 4 Capricorn. We're out of Taurus, but she still gets some stuff because it's daytime. 25, 28. Venus has 28 points. Are you with us now?
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so now we're going to look and see what's going on with Saturn. So that we looked at the moon, so we did it for the moon. She had 4 points there, which was lovely. Nothing, 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 nothing. And look, there she gets another 4 points, 8. Now let's move on to Saturn. We've already looked for Venus. Saturn gets 2 plus 1, which is 3, plus 5, which is 8, plus 5, which is 13, plus 2, which is 15, plus 1 is 16, plus 5 is 21, plus 5 is 26. Saturn gets 26. So pretty much we know that Venus is the ruler so far. She's probably the winner so far, right? So we already kind of knew it. I mean, I was worried because I thought that Saturn was going to become the compound mutant, and we're going to go back to the chart in a second, and we would see that we wouldn't really like that very much. Let's look at the next one. Mars, he gets 4, 8, 12, 16.
Yeah, it's interesting how like which points you choose to use like affect the outcome.
Exactly.
And-
Like,
and,
what
like,
if
which
if we
point-
put
yeah.
Jupiter? If we had put Jupiter in here, it would have affected the outcome a little bit differently too.
Totally. Or if you used
Yeah.
all three rulers, like I know people
Right,
who
we use
use
all three
day,
rulers.
night, and participating. Yeah.
But for this case, it makes sense to only use the first one because it's the one that represents children. You see what I mean? So even though all three triplicity rulers can also be seen as first area of time of life, that's children, second time of life, children, third time of life, but really the first triplicity ruler is children. The second is sensual pleasures. The third is legates and gifts and donations. So it really does make sense to just be looking at the most important one, which is why we're using only that one down here. Let's see, anybody, we really don't need to go on. It looks like we pretty much know who is the winner, but just to kind of be sure, Mercury gets 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. Anything else? No.
Okay. No, I mean Jupiter is kind of nothing. It gets like 3 points or something. Or whatever, like 8 points.
He gets 8. Yeah, the Jupiter, well, he gets 10. He gets 12.
Ooh, yeah, my bad.
And Jupiter gets 12. So, basically Venus is the winner. Venus is the winner, but we already knew that. So this is why I'm always saying that we're using the ruler of the house. We're using the planet in the house. We're using the part that represents what we're looking for. We're using the ruler of that part. We're using the compound mutant. We're using the triplicity ruler. We're using all this stuff, but we're using it all together. We're not using just one thing. And if anything, this has just confirmed what we already knew from the chart, which was that Venus is calling the shots about children. She's the ruler of the part of fortune. She's the ruler of the 5th house. She's the ruler of the part of children. She's really close to the ascendant. Now note, if indeed Saturn had become the ruler, we wouldn't have wanted to use him. I wouldn't have chosen him. Right? So if Saturn had become, this goes back to your point. If something's in fall, something's in detriment, something's in a bad house.
Well,
Right, so-
I don't know if you would choose not to use it. It would just indicate that person's ability to get pregnant.
No, because for a compound mutant, we're looking for the strongest planet to be a winner, right? A weak planet can win, but do you want to use that weak planet? No, you want to use the stronger planet. So for instance, in a situation like fertility, maybe indeed that the compound mutant is saying, well, but still the 12th house is a place that doesn't see the light of day. You want your baby to see the light of day. She was saying the Saturn is the place of its joy. And
I've read though that what it can indicate is that you're pregnant without knowing it. But I doubt this is what happened with this person. But like, at the time that she asked.
I wouldn't see that. No, I think this person can have children. I don't think that having children is a problem in this chart. Because the Venus is in charge of it.
I have a note on my little pregnancy tab here for astrology that also says Neptune equals hormones to get pregnant. I don't really know what it means, but I do notice that it's right on the AC.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't really pay attention to the Neptune stuff as far as signification. So it could certainly be there certainly could be hormonal issues, but I mean, certainly with Venus Neptune, this person has a problem staying in reality around love relationships already. So that's a different thing altogether. I mean, we're really just looking at it for children, but we know this person, the dick can make this person crazy. There's a woman who used to say, he done ejaculated all up in her brain. She done gone crazy. He done ejaculated all up in her brain. That's this chart, the other chart that we were just looking at. Right, because Venus, Neptune, right. Okay, what about this chart? What about this chart in fertility?
Did this person go through IVF?
I don't know. Let me see. I don't think so. None of the people told me. Moon in the 11th and sexual trauma, this person said.
Oof. Okay. Let's take a little looky-loo. Fifth,
So we're just looking for remember that Bonatti technique we're looking at, right? What did Bonatti say? We look at the 1st, the 7th, the 10th,
1, 7,
the 11th,
10, 11. Yeah.
and the 5th, and we look to
Yeah.
see who's where. So one of the things I see is that the ruler of the part of fortune is in the 11th. And that the part of fortune is on the cusp of the 7th. So those are two good signs that say, yeah, why not? That could possibly happen. Those are two signs possibly saying yay.
But the 7th is a sterile. Oh, well, I guess the cusp isn't. Never mind.
Nope. Yeah, this cusp is.
But the 5th is.
The 5th is. Also look at the ruler of the 11th.
Ruler of the 11th. Where's Jupiter? Okay. Is Capricorn fall or detriment for Jupiter?
Fall and
retrograde and cadent, just like my Venus. It's not fun.
So fall and retrograde, and then we've got a retrograde Venus. Both of those are our fertility planets.
Yeah.
Both of those are fertility planets. Also, Moon is in Sag, which is a sign of few children. We've got the Sun on the cusp of the 5th. The Sun is a planet that says no to children.
I never understood that, to be honest. But
why not? Because it
just doesn't really make sense.
It's too hot and dry.
You're looking for literal. Okay. All right.
It's the source of all life on Earth. But think about it. If you put the sun inside your womb, how would that do?
Yeah, not good for a woman.
It would burn it out. It would burn and dry it. Right? You don't want anything, right? Heat is drying. It really is about temperament. Think about what is the temperament of the womb. It is warm and wet. It's a temperate water environment.
Do you think in a water sign it would be all right though? Because I see a woman who's had a child and she's got sun in the 5th. So, but it's a water sign. So
yeah, maybe more so. Yes, more so, because then it's in a fertile sign.
I think that was the whole reason too. You look at the Almuden, even if it points you back towards one planet, is you're not just looking at like one aspect and making your judgment from there. You're trying to sort of look at a bunch of different things and balance it together.
Absolutely.
Because I find when I try to generalize with stuff like that, I would love for it to be so easy as just to say, like, if sun's in the 5th, this person can't get pregnant. I mean, I don't want it to be like that, but like, I'd like for it to be that simple, but I don't think it is.
We would love it to be like that, but it's generally usually not a good thing. Now, I would say probably if that person had sun in the 5th and did have a child, they had it with difficulty because he's going to make it hard. So they may have had to take hormones. Usually when I've seen sun in the 5th, they don't have they've had too much testosterone or don't have the necessary female hormones for it. So there may have been things that they had to do in order to have it happen. It usually does create difficulty. So
Aries is sterile too, right?
And Aries is not sterile.
Oh, okay. So ruler of the ascendant, but next to K2. have no
and
idea.
in fall, the ruler of the ascendant is
In
in fall.
fall. Yeah. Yeah. Which I've read to mean that, yeah, it could give problems having children, but I've also read it to mean you can have children with difficulty, or you might regret having them.
Yeah, I mean, this Venus in the fifth, that's kind of a nice thing, but once again, she's retrograde and she's sterile. Where's the part of children? It's nighttime, so it's going to be Saturn to Jupiter. So it's back 90 and forward 11. So back 90 is 29 Libra and forward 11 is what, 10 degrees of Scorpio. So that's a nice fertile sign. Where's Mars? Mars is in Taurus, kind of and look at how Mars is with Mercury, who's the ruler of the fifth. So the ruler of the part of children and the ruler of the fifth are together. So this might be a yes with difficulty chart. I mean, I'm inclined towards no. To be honest, I'm inclined towards a no, because more than likely they don't get married. And I don't think that there's a married and children life in this chart necessarily.
Moon in, like, they're more friends, like
Or
ruler
like-
of the 7th and the 11th.
Like more long-term relationship that doesn't produce children. They don't get married. The moon in Sag is restless. The Venus in Gemini will have problems with intimacy. Moon is the ruler of the 7th, opposing the Venus, applying to the opposition of Venus.
That Mercury applying to Mars as well.
To Mars as well.
Boy.
Yeah, I don't really love that. Mercury Mars is not really usually a very good thing. Mars is in detriment, but I mean, might be able to. Who was the one that said if you have the children, you might not enjoy it?
That's if the ruler of, if anything is in fall or detriment. Like, you might still get what you want, but it will come with some negative.
I think that they have a kid that ends up in jail. Ruler of the 5th and the 12th from the 5th.
Or what was CSG saying today? What's the 10th house? What, a fifth from the 5th? Or something like that.
Bhavat Bhabam. That's called Bhavat Bhabam, where you look at not only the house, but you look at the house that's that many houses from the house. So if you're looking at the 5th, you also look at the 9th, which is the 5th from the 5th. You're looking at the 10th, you look at the 7th, which is the 10th from the 10th.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's-
okay. That 9th, 5th.
But that's not necessarily a technique here. So these things don't always translate over.
True.
It makes sense from how they're deriving significations from the houses in the Vedic techniques, though, because I always hear 5th associated with education, and it never really makes sense.
Exactly. Right.
That
Exactly.
9th association.
Also, I mean, many of the significations are totally different, so it's really important to keep things separate and to be able to switch back and forth, as opposed to try to kind of bring the kitchen sink over and pour the water from one thing into another. This chart has more challenges in the children area, and once the child is here, the child should be a problem, should be problematic. In my opinion, because Mercury Mars almost always is unlawful. I brought it up today: unlawful, criminality, and there's there might even be a sensual look. It could even be for sex-oriented crimes. The Venus is in the 5th, and then Venus is ruling the 12th from the 5th. So if they do have a child, more than likely there could be maybe a promiscuity to this kid, or doing kind of unlawful sexual things that gets them incarcerated. This person's young. This person's not even 30 yet, so. But I do think that there will be difficulty having a child, and then difficulty with the experience of the child once they have it. No, we could look at the unmutant for this one too, but I mean, you see how much time it takes. So I think I'd rather not, but we got to see it for the other one. Now that other one really, really pointed very strongly to a child, to Venus being able to produce a child for that chart. Right? And even without the compound unmutant, it pointed to that. Even without the compound unmutant, it pointed to Venus being able to produce a child for the chart. This chart doesn't do the same thing. Note that the ruler of the part of fortune is in the seventh, or the ruler of the part of fortune is this moon in Sagittarius. And then the ruler of the part of children is was 10 degrees of Scorpio, is this Mercury, is this Mars, who's with Mercury. There's no connection between the moon and the Mars, but there is this conjunction, like you say, between the Mercury and the Mars. So I think that you're right, Haneen. I think that definitely this person probably can have a child with difficulty. And like I said, that when they have the child, it will be difficult. And the child will have impulse control problems, especially around sex and sensuality. Okay, what about this one?
Same deal. We're just kind of speculating and looking at the
Yeah,
houses
we're
you
just
mentioned.
speculating.
Cool.
Yeah, we're just
Amazing.
speculating. The good thing
Okay,
about
so-
this is that, I can go back to these people and say, hey, we came up with this. What's going on? Is that true?
Cool. That's super cool. So part of fortune in the 7th and Jupiter in the 11th. That's all I see in terms of planets in the signs.
So what was it? Part of fortune in the 7th and
Mhm.
Jupiter in the 11th.
Yeah. And there's nothing, and then yeah, because Venus is technically in the 2nd, and there's nothing in the 5th.
Okay, so those are both good signs, although Jupiter is retrograde.
But yeah, in his
Okay,
in his
so
house
then-
of joy.
Okay, in House of Its Joy, we've got the part of fortune in the 7th. We've got, okay, so the ruler of the
Ruler
5th
of
is
part of fortune is exalted too.
Oh, okay, that's nice. And so where
Yeah,
is?
ruler 5th is
Does it
Saturn.
point to children? But does it point to children?
If you're just looking at ruler of the 5th, oh, the Mars, you mean?
Yeah, that's what, does it, but does that possibly point to children? If we
I
do
don't
want to
think it
see,
goes one way or the other, does it?
I don't think it necessarily does. Notice how the ruler, look at the ruler of the fifth house. Where's the ruler of the 5th?
So it's cadent and in a sterile sign. Oh wait, sorry, is Virgo a sterile? It is though, or is it not?
Yes, it is. Yes, it
Okay.
is. So we've got the moon in a sterile sign. We've got the ruler of the 5th in a sterile sign. But we do have Jupiter in the 11th. We have nothing in the 10th. We have the part of fortune in the 7th. We've got nothing in the 1st. So let's find the part of children. It's nighttime, so it's Saturn to Jupiter.
No,
So
it
back
makes
30 and back another 5. So that, back 30 is 10 degrees of Virgo, and back another 5 is 5 degrees of Virgo. So that's not so great. And Saturn there. So the part of children has Saturn on it. And it's a sterile sign. And Rahu is there. Then look at the ruler of the part of children. So Mercury is the ruler of the part of children in detriment and retrograde. Moving away from the Jupiter, moving away from the square of Saturn.
What does it say about this person's chart?
Let's see, what did they say? I think this was 11th house. This might be another one of those 11th house ones. Figures I've been choosing all the 11th house planets. Oh, over 34, no children. Obvious, right?
Yeah, but
Saturn could just delay.
Over
I
34.
wouldn't say it's a lost cause.
1978, this person's almost 50. Yeah, this is definitely a no children chart. Now, I mean, if anything, especially the Saturn on the part of children. There's so many things here. The part of children is Virgo. The Saturn is on it. The Saturn is the ruler of the 5th house. So first of all, Saturn is ruler of the 5th house, as you said, can delay or say no. Remember, Saturn says no. So Saturn can say no. Then on top of that, we've got the ruler of the part of children is in detriment and retrograde. Venus, where she's in detriment, even though she's in a fertile sign, Venus is detrimented. The moon is, not only is the moon in a sterile sign, but the moon is detrimented in Gemini, and the moon is detrimented when she's full, because then she's in what are called the combus degrees. So this chart could probably bring a long-term relationship, right? Because the ruler of the 7th is exalted, the ruler of the part of fortune is exalted, or a strong business partnership, but cannot bring children. So the next thing I want to come to is that chart I was telling you about. Twins and a new baby. This woman just had twins and a new baby. And we've got a lot of the same things that we saw before. And note how we've got the ruler of the 5th in fall and retrograde. It's daytime, so the sun becomes the first triplicity ruler. He's in a sterile sign. Yeah, well, it's one of the ways that a moon can be detrimented. I don't mean detriment like the opposite of domicile. I mean that it's an impediment. That's a better term, impediment. Gemini is supposed to be an impediment for the moon because it's the 12th house or the 12th sign from Cancer. So, but look at this chart. A retrograde Venus in Gemini, Sun in Gemini, Mercury and Mars in Taurus. So we've got the Mercury saying yes, we've got the Venus saying yes, we've got the Mars and the Sun saying no. We've got the Jupiter at the very end of the 5th house, but in fall. So when I saw this chart, she was just saying, I'm pregnant with twins. That's what it was. I'm pregnant with twins, and I just had I've got a baby in 1 year. Why? Right? So this was the chart that I looked at and I was like, why? This bitch should be sterile. So let's look at the part of children. It's daytime, so it's Jupiter and Saturn. And it's 90 degrees minus 11. So forward 90 is Scorpio, minus 11 is 21, so 10 degrees of Scorpio. Scorpio is a fertile sign. Mars is in the 10th house. Now look, Mars is in the 10th house. Taurus is a sign of few children. Mercury is the ruler of the 11th. So now what we have is we've got Mercury, who is a planet that represents children, right? Remember, it was one of the planets that we were looking for in 1, 7, 10, or 11 that says yes for children. Then we're also looking for the planet that rules the part of children. We have that here. Note that we had it also in the other one, right? We had the ruler of the 5th and the ruler of the part of children, but they were down in the 4th. Now here they are up in the 10th, which is what we're looking for. So in this particular case, even though I don't love Mercury Mars, it can still be a possibility. Who's the part of fortune? Where's the part of fortune here? So it's daytime, sun to moon. So it's 120 plus 19. 120 plus 19, with 40 degrees, so 10 degrees of Capricorn. 10 degrees of Capricorn brings us to Saturn or Mars, right? Mars is the exaltation ruler of Capricorn. Neither of them are in the best of shape, but Mars is up there. And note that by sign, or at least by this particular house system, the part of fortune would be in the 5th house. Obviously, if we used whole sign, the part of fortune would be in the 6th. So it's not really the part of fortune that we're using here. We're not using the ruler of the 5th house. The ruler of the 5th house is at the end of the 5th, but really belonging to the 6th. I wonder if there is, I wonder if there becomes a physical issue with each pregnancy in this chart. Now, this is a chart where I can't really ask anybody anything, but note that the ruler of the 5th is belonging to the 6th. The ruler of the 5th is in Capricorn, is fallen and retrograde. But the first triplicity ruler of the 5th is up in the 10th, going towards the 11th. And it's in a sign of the twins, right? Venus is up there in the sign of the twins.
What did you say, that this could be bad for her? Childbirth could be risky?
I'm wondering if childbirth could be risky physically, because first of all, well, the ruler of the ascendant is in Gemini. It was really because the ruler of the 5th is in the 6th. See, I would really be expecting there be a weak fertility kind of in this chart with that, right? Or maybe the child is sickly.
Maybe.
Sickly children.
Ruler of whole sign 5th is fallen. And well, I guess in the
whole sign 6th.
In the whole
Right.
of the like whole sign. Isn't whole sign Capricorn?
No, the whole sign is Sagittarius. It's Leo rising.
Oh, 1, 2, 3. Okay, never mind.
So Jupiter's in Capricorn, which would be the whole sign 6th.
Yeah.
So with a fallen, so in my opinion, says there, it could be two things, and maybe two things at the same time. This could be that this person could give birth to a child who is very sickly and who has financial problems. So either it is financially dependent because of how sickly they are, or deals with financial issues and issues of illness. Because the ruler of the 5th is in the 2nd from the 5th and fallen, or it's connected to the 2nd of 5th and fallen in that house. So their money, so definitely their child will have money problems, but a fallen planet that is also retrograde usually is indicative of remember, the 5th house is the ascendant of the child. So the ruler of the 5th house is the child's chart ruler. And in this particular case, it's extremely weak. And the ruler of the 6th from the 5th, let's see. Okay, so Venus is the ruler of the 6th from the 5th. And note how Mercury and the Mars are in that house trining, or just leaving the trine of the Jupiter. Yeah, so I think that, yes. So I think that, yeah, this person can have children. And obviously we're seeing the twin thing kind of showing up. But it also is showing up that there might be a possibility of the children being sickly, or there being some kind of disability with the children, with a child, and possibly with the first child. Right, because the 5th usually represents the first child. So you can see that when I was just looking at it from my own little viewpoint, which was, okay, ruler of the ascendant, ascendant, ruler of the ascendant, both sterile. Ruler of the moon, ruler of the moon. Moon is in Libra, Venus is in a sterile sign. Then ruler of the 5th in fall, retrograde. as far as I'm concerned, this chart shouldn't really be having any children. But then when we look at it from actually the standpoint of Bonatti and the technique that we just learned, we see that we've got Venus, we've got the ruler of the ascendant in the 10th and in the natural 11th. And then we have Venus, who's the natural ruler of fertility, even though she's retrograde in a sterile sign. We've got Mercury, who's the ruler of the 11th. So we've got this exchange between the 11th and the 10th. Right? So they're in each other's generosity there. Mercury's in Taurus, Venus is in Gemini. So they can give the power to each other to do that. Mercury is children, Venus is fertility. Mars is the ruler of the part of children with Mercury, who also represents children. Sun is the ruler of the ascendant. So I think when looking at it from the standpoint of the technique that we just learned, this chart does point to the ability to have children and the possibility of twins. But also the possibility of children with problems, children with physical ailments, and definitely with money problems. Note also that the ruler of the 2nd from the 5th, Saturn, is fallen. Which makes me wonder if the person themselves comes into hard financial times. Note that Mercury is with Mars, the ruler of the 2nd house is with Mars. That could make them and notice that the ruler of the 2nd and the ruler of the 9th, the ruler of the 4th, ruler of the 2nd and the 4th are in the 10th. So those things can be advancing, and Mars and Mercury together can be criminality. And so that means that the mother, right, 10th house is mother, so it could be that the mother, there's some criminality around it. I think there could also be a susceptibility to being cheated. Possibly a susceptibility to being cheated. Mercury, Mars with their money, or them cheating somebody else, or them doing some kind of financial fraudulent thing, or some kind of fraudulence being done on them. But it makes me wonder, I see this 2nd from the 5th being so fucked up, and the ruler of the 1st house of the 5th being fucked up, and in this kind of going into the 2nd from the 5th. And I wonder, oh, is that just the children that are going to have a problem? Or is it a legacy of their family where they have problems? Let's look for the 2nd from the 4th. Right? The 4th house is the children's, or the 4th house is this person's family. Oh, wait, so what we should be looking at is the 4th from the 5th. The 4th from the 5th is Pisces. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, right? 4th from the 5th is Pisces, right? And that, so already we see the Jupiter in Capricorn retrograde is the ruler of the 4th and the 5th. This is the children's family of origin. Then we look at the 2nd from the 4th from the 5th. So we look at the what is it, the 9th house, which is the 2nd from the 4th from the 5th. So which is the children's family of origins money. And we see the Saturn fallen there. So I think that this person themselves is going to have money problems. And their money problems, I think there are generational money problems that are passed on to the children in this chart. I mean, think about how expensive it is to raise children right now. And this person now has 3. How difficult to catch up. You know, even if you're middle class, if you don't have some help, if you're not upper middle class, have some help from your family, down payment, you know, paying your college has been paid off. If this person has loans, if this person has a car, you know, a major car note or a mortgage or whatever, it's easy to get behind financially. I can this, and also if indeed there is some kind of fraud or cheating, or they themselves are cheating, or something like that, where they get caught and they not just get caught, but they get decimated in the process. These are all my speculations around this chart. because it didn't show up. Hey, yeah, go ahead, Klutze.
Shoo. Yeah, Antoine. You see,
Yeah.
the moon at 27 degrees,
Yes.
and then the trine is what the Venus. Could you help me with this, probably in terms of children? Because I read somewhere that when the moon is in the water sign, there's a higher chance of you having a twin.
I think that's a good question as far as children are concerned. I think I think in some respect it probably is pointing. Oh, it is pointing to what first of all, what does the moon rules? The moon is in its joy in the third, and Venus is the ruler of the third. So that's one thing. And then Venus is also ruler of the 10th. And so I think I think that those two things, especially the fact that Venus is the ruler of the 10th and Venus is the ruler of the moon herself, that might be another contributing factor for why this planet can produce children, or this chart can produce children. This chart can produce a lot of things in regard to the 10th house and Venusian related things. This person might be into poetry, writing and poetry and things of that nature as well. The Mercury there might make them a writer. The Venus in Gemini might make them interested in writing and language. And with the moon in Gemini and with the moon in Venus's sign, then once again that would kind of connect them to this idea of kind of love and pleasure and beauty, and also children. And once again, since we've got these things that are signifying children, Venus is the ruler of the 10th. Venus is in the 11th. She's one of the planets that says yes to children. Mercury and Mars are saying yes to children in this chart. The sun, since it's ruler of the ascendant, is saying yes to children as far as I'm concerned. So I think that yes, this is one of those places where one thing is representing many different things. We're looking at Venus as the ruler of the 3rd and 10th. We're looking at Venus as love. We're looking at Venus as one of these planets that can represent children, right? And so seeing kind of the full, also she's retrograde, so it's going to be unexpected. Now, this was totally unexpected. This woman was flabbergasted. She had a baby. She already had a fucking kid. And all of a sudden she finds out that she's pregnant with twins. That's when she wrote in. So there can also be the retrograde action of Venus, that which is unexpected, that which we don't think about, returning to an evil, right? That's what they say about retrograde, it returns to an evil. Nobody enjoys labor. Labor is a necessary evil. So there's Venus returning us to the evil.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's just me spitballing. Haneen, were you going to say something? I saw your name come up. No? Anything else? Any other questions about some of the stuff that we've seen so far? Oh, I know what I wanted to do. The next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to look at a chart of somebody who was very fortunate. We're going to look at Ella Fitzgerald again. Because what I want to do is I want to see, because if anything on some level, Ella Fitzgerald, after a certain amount of time, lived a charmed life. When you think about a person who was not typically beautiful, who was a street urchin, was a homeless street urchin, and could have easily fallen through the cracks, of a person who was abused and sent to a reformatory, that this person should be a person to have received one of the highest honors in the land.
Hey, Garth,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you have that last chart handy? I wanted to take a screenshot of it real quick. Sorry, I just feel like I just interrupted your whole flow.
No, it's okay. I can come back to it.
I was just doing a longer calculation. I want to check and see something. Okay, and I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so what we're looking for is, does the 5th house involve itself in a person's life who's very fortunate? This is a very fortunate life. This person experienced the heights of everything, traveled all over the world, not just, not just travel and wealth and fame, but this is one of the most beloved people in the history of music. I saw Ella Fitzgerald in 1985. And the thing that I remember the most was somebody in front of me, this young, gorgeous white guy, screaming, "I love you!" And she stopped everything. She wasn't singing yet. She was in the midst of starting to say something. And she stopped everything and she said, "And I love you." And she was 100%, 100% honest. So if that's not fortune, if that's not somebody who's experienced good fortune, I don't know what is. That a stranger would yell and tell them how much they love them because of what their talent has done for them. So, whose rules the fifth house? Talk to me. Who rules the fifth house? No one?
Jupiter
And where is it?
in Taurus, and Venus is there in Taurus, in the heart of the sun.
Yep. So I would say fortune, the root part of fifth house is important in this chart. We've talked about this chart a lot, right? And we've talked about the Casimir, about how Ella Fitzgerald made me change my mind around whether Casimir actually was a thing or not. And that this chart tells us everything we need to know about this life, about the voice, about music, about high honors, about everything. And sure enough, what? What was the question? What was the question, Layla? Sorry? Okay.
Sorry, I keep breaking up.
Oh, what did you say?
Was she ever married? What was her dating
Yes.
life like?
Why? Why do you ask that? And tell me, yeah, what are you looking at that makes you ask that?
Saturn, ruler of the 7th and the 12th, and your Uranus, like kind of on the cusp there.
Mm-hmm. What do you think?
It doesn't look good. I would say like maybe she dated someone who was married. Maybe there were some shakeups in the love life, and not necessarily in a good way.
So she was married, but it did not last very long. There were difficulties with men, obviously. Remember, Ella Fitzgerald was not a beauty queen. She was fat, she was overweight. She was not beautiful, and so she was not glamorous, and she never really attracted very many men. She was seen as one of the boys from the time that she was 15, 16. And the man that she married was a bass player who she toured and traveled with. And so they were both people that were on the road all the time. And I think it was infidelity that was the reason. But no, marriage was a problem in her life. And she actually ended up being courted by a man who it turned out was a criminal who was trying to kind of steal money from her. And yeah, so that area of life is an area in which she was not fortunate. Now, I have a question. Can we look at the fifth house in relation to any house to see the good fortune of that house? Right? So would we look at it doesn't really work. I'm thinking like, would we get to see how well the marriage is from the fifth from the seventh? No, because look at how the fifth from the seventh is Mercury, and there it is with all that stuff. No, but what we can see is that the condition of the ruler of the seventh shows us how not so good that area of life is. Notice also that Mars is making the aspect also to the Saturn, making the square. So we know that that area of life is an area of life in which they were not fortunate. But what if we had Jupiter in the seventh in this chart?
Better.
Probably, right? We would probably have said, oh yeah, I think so. If Jupiter were at 20, let's say Jupiter were at 22, 25 degrees of Aquarius, then the Mars would be applying to it, right? We'd have the ruler of the fifth and the seventh. Just interesting to think about. Let's look at another chart of somebody fortunate.
Hey, Antoine, before you switch, or
Mhm.
I have it in my head, you don't have to go back. That square, was that pushing because Saturn was in Aries? Saturn is in Cancer, Mars was in, I
Aries.
feel like a bad sign for Saturn. Is that pushing fall? Is that a thing? Like the square is made even worse because of the signs that they're in?
Well, it's doing two things. It's pushing nature, it's pushing power because Mars is in his own sign. So Mars is pushing his power at Saturn, but it's also mutually pushing fall
Yeah.
because Mars is in the fall of Saturn and Saturn is in the fall of Mars. Note
Okay.
that Mars is pushing the ninth house to the sixth house of illness. Remember how we talked about this person was on the road all the time and she ended up losing her legs as a result. She ended up having heart failure and then having a leg amputated. Like she ended up, all of the travel that she ended up doing affected her health. Does that make sense? I wanted to look at Judy Garland because this is a chart that has both. It's got good fortune and bad fortune. Where's the ruler of the fifth? Who rules the fifth and where is it?
In the sixth. Oh, oops. No. In the first.
In the first. Now, in this particular case, there are two rulers of the fifth house. There is
Yeah.
Venus, who's the ruler of the cusp, and then there's Mars, who's intercepted. What did I just say about this chart? I
Good
said
and bad.
there are good and bad fortune. There's two types of fortune in this chart. Notice that there's good fifth house karma in this chart, and there's bad fifth house karma. The good fifth house karma is connected to anything Venusian, so that would be music, right? Venus is the arts and music. The bad fifth house karma is anything connected to money and gain and income, right? Because Mars is the ruler of the 11th in this chart. And Mars is also the ruler of the second.
Antoine, didn't she also have like substance use issues at some point?
Absolutely.
So
Substance abuse.
yeah, I see that when I see fifth, sixth connections, because it's like fifth rules like the substances, the drugs, and I think six like the illness that results from them.
The abuse of it, or the even abuse of it, sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. Or sixth and the fifth, ruler of the sixth and the fifth as well can do that. See, so I mean, this is definitely an addict's chart. This is an addict's chart, but it happened as a result of work, right? So she became an addict on the job. Can we see that? Not really. Unless we were looking, see, I think that the Moon Mercury opposition is an important thing. And the fact that Jupiter is ruling it, so you've got the Venus that's ruling the Saturn Jupiter thing, and that's also opposing the part of fortune. So the Venus is really doing all the good. But but notice also that, like we said, the ruler of the 12th is Mercury, and the ruler of the 12th Mercury that's the self-undoing, and that's with the moon. The moon is applying to the ruler of the 12th. And so I think that that's what's really part of the major problem in this chart is that, and both of them are applying to the Saturn, which is the ruler of the part of fortune. So in this particular case, we've got a self-undoing that's affecting the ruler of the ascendant, mind you, right? The ruler of the ascendant is Cancer. Cancer is the ascendant. Moon is ruler of the ascendant. So this is the mind, body, spirit. The whole gestalt of the person is wrapped up in negative feedback loop stuff. But, bad self-talk. The mother obviously was a problem too. And remember, the father left the home, so the mother was taking care of everything. So we've got the parent, the main parent, is the Virgo, is Mercury too. And so I think that this person was really under siege and mentally not particularly stable. I don't think this person was really that mentally stable. And as a result, then it affects how they were able to experience their path to fortune, or this Saturn, this exalted Saturn that's with Jupiter. And mind you, the part of fortune is with the ruler of the 6th. So even though it's exalted, it's still got bad fortune connected with it, right? It's still, so the ruler, the whole sign 6th is definitely the Jupiter. And it's interesting that the ruler of the whole sign 5th is this Mars sun, but she had 3 children. So the Venus does seem on some level to make more sense. But the children went through all kinds of hell dealing with her because of her drug addiction and running out of money and having to move in the middle of the night and not tell people, and having to face creditors down, the mother being drunk and having to take care of her, so there's all this trauma. So we can see both the Venus and the Mars as connected with what the children had to go to too, as well.
You see the whole drug addict at work thing too, with the Mars connection. If you look at it whole sign, because it becomes 5th and 10th house, right?
Because then it rules the 5th and the 10th. Yes. So it's the going for the thing that I love that brings me ruin, so to speak.
Well, yeah, because Mars itself is in the 6th. The 2 things that bring her ruin are her pastimes or whatever, drinking, and the job itself.
And the job itself. Yeah. So it shows the malefic influence. Remember, we were talking about last week with the 10th house, the substance that the job, right? The substance of the job. In this particular case, when we look at the midheaven, which is Pisces, we see the substance that is brought to the job is the arts, right? Libra, right? All this stuff that's in Libra. And this kind of unconventional talent, and that's this conventional artistic talent. But we also see the instability with the Uranus there.
Yep, I was wondering if you were going to comment on it.
Of course. I mean, it's there, right? So we also see the instability, the suddenness and instability and sudden changes and things of that nature there. But then if we use Mars as the ruler of the 10th, we use Aries as the sign of the 10th house, then we have both the domicile ruler and exaltation ruler in opposition, showing the malefic effect of the work life. So we can see it, same thing, we can see it from both ways. When we look at it using the midheaven, then the substance of the work life is this Saturn, Jupiter, Libra, which should be wonderful, right? And that's the height to which she was able to achieve. But when we look at it from the Mars standpoint, from the Aries standpoint, then we see not only is Ketu there creating a malaise and a disillusionment, but we've got Mars and Sun opposing each other, creating contention and disillusionment and unhappiness, and and just no happiness at all in it. This person should have experienced very little enjoyment at all. Maybe the only time that they enjoyed it when they were actually performing. Probably everything else around it they did not enjoy at all. Or that it turned. Do you think prominent Uranus could lead to bipolar disorder? I don't want to, that's for a modern astrologer to say. I don't want to speculate. That doesn't interest me enough. Yeah, I think there's plenty of other stuff that points to that here. instead. Okay, so I think that's where we'll stop.